Is it possible that one of the most loved and admired teams in modern F1 has emotionally betrayed one of its own drivers, right at the most painful moment of his career? What did Nico Rosberg really mean with that message that shook the paddock, and why could this mark a before and after at McLaren? The year 2025 should be remembered as the culmination of a perfect project for McLaren. A masterpiece woven from engineering, strategy, and perseverance. They had built one of the most competitive cars of the modern era, the MCL39. A car that not only dominated from day one, but also proved to be extremely reliable in a season plagued by errors on the part of its rivals. The Woking team arrived in Abu Dhabi with an unbeatable outlook. The constructors' title secured, and its two drivers Lando Norris and Oscar Piastri as the main contenders for the Drivers' Championship, with Max Verstappen as a latent but controlled threat. But as happens so often in Formula One, history is not always written by pure performance, but by details, silences, and decisions invisible to the naked eye. For 6 months, Oscar Piastri led the championship with a maturity and perseverance that surprised everyone and everyone. Their advantage exceeded 30 points over their closest pursuers. In each Grand Prix, his clean driving style, technical approach, and communication with the team were impeccable. It seemed that everything was on track to establish him as world champion in his second full year in the category. And yet, everything began to break. Slowly, imperceptibly at first. A strategy decision in Qatar that was not understood. A late stop in Las Vegas. A confusing team order in Japan. And race after race, that difference that seemed unbreakable evaporated, until reaching Abu Dhabi with only a slight advantage over Norris and Verstappen. The final Grand Prix was the culmination of the drama. Piastri made no mistakes on the track. His driving was solid, technical, precise. But it wasn't enough. At the end of the 58 laps, his name was not among the champions. Lando Norris took the title by just 13 points. Max Verstappen was between the two, only 11 units ahead of the Australian. A minimal difference, but enough to write the story in a different way. And that was when the final emotional blow came. In the midst of Piastri's silence, who was barely able to respond on the radio with a thread of voice, his engineer tried to comfort him with genuine words. But the conversation was interrupted by Zak Brown, the CEO of McLaren. His tone was enthusiastic, celebratory. He congratulated Oscar on his 7 victories. It reminded him that he was a star, that they loved him, that next year they would try again. Right words in the wrong context. Because at that time, Piastri didn't want a corporate speech. He wanted someone to validate his pain. What seemed like a year of shared glory transformed in a matter of minutes into a bitter end for one of the protagonists. The image is powerful. A driver who gave everything, who led for almost the entire season, who took the team to the top, and who felt emotionally displaced at the most vulnerable moment. Because while all of McLaren celebrated with Norris at the top of the podium, Oscar Piastri got out of the car alone, without a title, without consolation, without a real gesture of empathy from his most visible leader. In high-performance sport, the margins are minimal. But in Formula One, those margins can be made of emotions, gestures, words that were not said when they were most needed. McLaren's outcome in 2025 was not just a lesson in strategy or speed. It was a lesson in humanity. A warning that even in the best prepared team, one person's pain can be buried under another's applause. When the 2025 Abu Dhabi Grand Prix ended, Oscar Piastri's silence said it all. There were no screams, no visible tears, but there was an unmistakable emotional charge. It was then that Nico Rosberg, in the middle of a live broadcast for Sky Sports F1, did what many did not dare to say. With cutting clarity, he put into words what millions of fans felt when they heard Zak Brown's message. There was a lack of empathy. And in Formula One, in those decisive moments where a driver's soul breaks, that lack weighs as much as an error in the pits or a bad pit stop. Rosberg, world champion in 2016, knows the pressure of the final laps in Abu Dhabi. He won his title right there, under a relentless siege from Lewis Hamilton. He knows perfectly well what those final turns feel like when everything is at stake, when an entire season is defined by thousands, by decisions that are not in your hands. Therefore, his words were not just a criticism, they were a lesson. Rosberg did not speak as a commentator, he spoke as a driver, like someone who had been there. And because of that, his analysis struck a very deep chord. That is his most horrible moment in his racing career. Maybe Zak could have had a little more empathy there instead of celebrating. It wasn't just the radio message. It was about the subtext, of what was not said, of what was not felt. Zak Brown, amid the legitimate euphoria over Norris' championship, didn't pause emotionally to connect with Piastri. There was no explicit recognition of the fact that Oscar had been, for most of the year, the man who took McLaren to the front. That he had endured the pressure of leading, the pressure of expectation, the pressure of being perfect. And that he had failed only in the end due to details beyond his control. Rosberg went further. His criticism was not an isolated reaction to an uncomfortable message. It was an evaluation of McLaren's emotional management model. Throughout the season, the British team had promoted a narrative of absolute equality between its two drivers. The famous papaya rules were not just a communication strategy, they were an institutional commitment. There would be no number one driver, there would be no preferences, there would be no decisions in favor of one over the other. But what Rosberg pointed out with surgical precision was that this neutrality, that idealism, also had a price. When it came time to make strategic decisions that benefited one driver over another, McLaren froze. The fear of breaking that force symmetry paralyzed the team. And in Formula One, where the margins are thousands, freezing is equivalent to losing. According to Rosberg, McLaren was not able to assume the tough role that teams that want to win have, making unpopular, sometimes even painful, but necessary decisions. Red Bull has done it. Mercedes too. Not McLaren. And that is where his message takes on a broader dimension. Because Rosberg not only questions emotional management, but McLaren's competitive philosophy. The idea that they can win championships without internal hierarchies, without prioritizing at key moments, without making sacrifices. It is a noble utopia, but in practice it has rarely been proven effective. Rosberg poses an uncomfortable truth for any team that wants to be on top. At some point you have to choose. You have to bet. You have to decide which of your two drivers has the best chance of winning the title, and give them that backing. What McLaren did was the opposite. He tried to balance two worlds without understanding that the championship waits for no one. Piastri was the great victim of that philosophy. And Rosberg, from his experience, from his personal experience as a driver who felt emotionally isolated during his own battle for the title, could not remain silent. Throughout the season, the official narrative was clear: absolute equality. McLaren opted for what it called internally as papaya rules, an unwritten code that guaranteed equal treatment for Lando Norris and Oscar Piastri. No hierarchies, no number one pilot. In theory, a modern, inclusive, merit-based philosophy. In practice, an extremely fragile balance, which began to crumble as soon as the real circumstances of the championship demanded quick decisions and, above all, asymmetric decisions. And the most dangerous thing is the psychological impact this had internally. For Norris, who finally became champion, the system worked. But for Piastri, the driver who saw a title that seemed his in its own right slip away, the message was devastating. Because he didn't just lose on the track. He legitimately felt that his own team did not support him with the necessary forcefulness. That when it most needed to be prioritized, McLaren decided to stay in the comfort of a tie. A tie that in F1 rarely ends well. The comparison with historical pairs is inevitable. The tension between Hamilton and Rosberg at Mercedes was brutal but clear. Toto Wolff, with all his diplomacy, knew when to intervene, when to divide strategies, when to call for order. Even the relationship between Vettel and Webber at Red Bull, although contentious, was clearly directed. Vettel was the man of the project. In McLaren 2025, that authority figure, that emotional and competitive directive, never appeared. Zak Brown and Andrea Stella were so committed to the equality discourse that they forgot something essential. A team also needs to take sides when a title is at stake. Oscar Piastri, the other protagonist of this story, not only lost a championship. He lost a form of trust that takes years to build and only seconds to destroy. For much of the year, he was the dominant figure. The cold, calculating driver, who seemed to have the maturity of a consolidated champion in his hands despite his short experience. His leadership in the championship was no coincidence. Every victory, every fastest lap, every pole was an affirmation that McLaren had not only built a winning car, but had two titans behind the wheel. The 2026 season may be the toughest test for McLaren. Let me know in the comments what you think about all this.